At my sister's anniversary dinner, I was already seated when my father raised his glass and thanked everyone for supporting the real backbone of this family. He nodded toward her, smiling, while I sat 3 feet away holding the bill I had quietly paid. No one corrected him. My mother kept eating. Her husband laughed and squeezed her hand. Someone across the table said I was always good with money. Like it was a joke, I felt every eye pass over me and move on. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just sat there invisible while they celebrated. The dinner ended the way it always did, with my sister, surrounded by people, and my father walking her to the door like she was the guest of honor in a house she didn't pay for. I stayed behind to settle the last details with the staff, signing the receipt with a pen that barely worked. The total sat heavy on the page, but no one asked about it. No one ever did, on the drive home. My phone buzzed once, a message from my father. "You didn't have to do all that tonight." No thank you. No acknowledgement. Just a quiet correction, like I had overstepped by making things easier. This wasn't new. It just felt sharper that night. 3 months earlier, my father had called me on a Sunday afternoon. His tone was calm, measured the way he spoke when he had already decided something and only needed me to agree. He told me my sister and her husband were having trouble with their mortgage. "Temporary," he said. "Just a gap in cash flow." He mentioned the baby, the stress, the timing. He didn't ask if I could help. He asked how quickly I could transfer the money. I remember standing in my kitchen looking at the window above the sink while he talked. The glass had a small crack in the corner I kept meaning to fix. I focused on that instead of what he was asking. "How much?" I said. There was a pause, like he was deciding how honest to be. 35. He said. Finally, "It'll be returned in a few months." I knew better than to ask for details. Every time I had in the past, it turned into something else. A conversation about trust, about family, about how keeping track of money made things cold. So I said, yes. I wired the money that evening. My sister texted me a single line, "You saved us, I owe you." There was a heart emoji at the end. It felt rehearsed, like something she'd sent before. Weeks passed. Then more. No updates, no mention of repayment. Instead, there were photos, dinner outings, new furniture in their living room, a weekend trip that showed up on her social media without explanation. My father liked every post. I didn't say anything. I never did right away. I told myself there was context. I didn't see that maybe things weren't as simple as they looked, but small things started to shift one evening. I stopped by my parents' house unannounced. The lights were on, voices carrying from the kitchen. I let myself in the way I always had. No one noticed at first. My father was at the table with a stack of papers. My sister sat across from him, her husband leaning back in his chair, relaxed. They were talking numbers. I caught fragments, interest rates, deadlines. Another loan. I stood in the doorway longer than I should have. My father saw me first. His expression changed quickly, like a curtain dropping. "We were just talking," he said, gathering the papers into a neat pile. My sister smiled at me too quickly. "You should have called. We would have waited for you, waited for me, like I was late to something I wasn't invited to." I asked what was going on. "Not accusing, just direct," my father answered before anyone else could. "Nothing you need to worry about." That was his way of ending conversations. Not harsh, not loud, just final. I nodded like it made sense. Like I understood my place in the room. Later that night, as I was leaving, I saw the envelope on the counter. My sister's name printed across the front, final notice stamped in. Read. I didn't mention it. I didn't ask again, but something settled in me on the drive home. Not anger. Not even disappointment. Just the quiet understanding that decisions were being made around me with my money, and I was only included when something was need. Looking back, it wasn't one moment. That made things clear. It was the way every situation followed the same shape over and over until it stopped feeling like coincidence. I had always been the one who adjusted. When we were younger, it showed up in smaller ways. My sister got the larger bedroom because she needed space. I moved my things without arguing. At holidays, she chose the restaurant I agreed before anyone asked what I wanted. If there was one piece of something left dessert, a gift, even attention, it went to her without discussion. At the time it felt normal. She was louder, quicker to react. I was easier. That was the word my mother used. You've always been the easy one. I carried that into adulthood without thinking. My first job out of college paid just enough to cover rent and groceries. I worked late, saved what I could, and kept quiet about it. When I got my first raise, my father found out before I told him. He called that night. "You're doing well," he said. "That's good. It means you can help." When things come up, it wasn't a question. It never was. The first time I gave them money, it felt temporary. My father's car needed repairs, and he was between contracts. I transferred the amount without hesitation. He thanked me that time. It was brief, but it was there. The second time, it was my mother's medical bill. She cried on the phone, her voice thin and tired. I didn't ask for details. I paid it directly. By the third time, it had become routine. There was always a reason, always something, urgent enough to bypass conversation, taxes, repairs, a shortfall that would be fixed soon. Each time I told myself it was the last, but it never was. My sister's requests were different, less emotional, more casual. She didn't call to explain, she texted, "Can you cover this? I'll send it back next month. I'm short on payroll this week, just until Friday. It's easier if you handle it." There was always an assumption in her tone, like the answer had already been decided. Sometimes she did. Pay me back. Small amounts enough to make it feel balanced even when it wasn't. Other times it disappeared into silence. I kept track in the beginning. Spreadsheets, notes, dates. It made me feel in control. Like I was managing something temporary. One night. My mother saw the list. She was standing behind me in the kitchen looking over my shoulder at my laptop. "Why would you write it down like that?" she asked softly. "So I don't forget," I said. Her expression changed. Not anger, not exactly. Something closer to disappointment. "We're not strangers," she said. "We're your family." I closed the file after that. Not because I agreed, but because it felt easier than explaining over time. The numbers blurred. I stopped counting. It became less about the money and more about the role I filled, the reliable one. The quiet solution at gatherings. It showed up in small comments. "She's always been good with finances. She doesn't need much. She understands how things work." It sounded like praise, but it wasn't. It was positioning, a way of defining me without asking who I actually was. The anniversary dinner just made it visible. Sitting there listening to my father praise my sister for holding everything together, I realized something I had been avoiding for years. It wasn't that they didn't see what I was doing. It was that they had decided it didn't count the same way. My help was expected, hers was celebrated. And once I saw that clearly, it became harder to pretend. I was choosing this. It felt more like I had been assigned a place and I had stayed in it long enough that no one thought to question it, including me. The moment it shifted didn't feel dramatic. There was no argument, no raised voices, no clear line anyone else could point to later. It happened quietly in the middle of an ordinary week. It started with a letter. I found it in my mailbox on a Tuesday evening, mixed in with ads and a utility bill. The envelope was from a bank I didn't recognize. At first, I assumed it was a mistake, something addressed to the wrong person. That happened sometimes in my building, but my name was printed clearly across the front. Inside was a statement, a loan summary. The numbers were too large to process all. At once, I read the first line, then the second, then went back to the top again. A home equity line of credit opened 2 months earlier. The property listed was my house. I stood in my kitchen for a long time, holding the paper in both hands. The room felt too quiet. Even the refrigerator hum seemed distant. I hadn't applied for anything. I hadn't signed anything. My mortgage had been steady for years. No changes, no adjustments. I read further down. Authorized user, my sister's name. I sat down slowly. At the table, the chair scraping against the floor louder than it should have. My hands felt cold, but my face didn't change. It was the same feeling I had at the dinner. That stillness where everything sharpens. There was a number at the bottom of the page, I called it. The person on the line spoke in a steady, practiced tone. They confirmed the account, the balance, the date it had been opened. Every detail matched the paper in front of me. I didn't open this, I said, a pause. Then, the application. Includes your signature and identification. I looked at the line where my name was written. It looked close enough. The shape, the letters. But it wasn't right. The pressure was off. The spacing slightly uneven. It was my name, but not my hand. I need copies of everything. I said, they told me how to request the documents, what forms to fill out, what to expect next. I thanked them and hung up. I didn't call my sister. I didn't call my parents. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up my accounts. Everything I could access, I checked statements, dates, transactions. There were transfers I didn't recognize. Small at first, then larger. Always tied back to that line of credit. It wasn't just opened in my name, it had been used. I worked through it. Piece by piece, no emotion, just process. I wrote down amounts, dates, destinations, the same way I used to track everything before I stopped.